Hello, welcome to Good Charts lecture. And in this specific chapter, I'm going to talk about dashboard stories and how you can use good charts to tell stories. Now, most of the material in this chapter is based on of a book by Scott Bernato, and his book Good Charts was published I think in 2016, and he became one of the best sellers. And his book is kind of complementary to what we have been discussing, especially with Edward Tufts, lessons. And his book is more on the kind of business side on how you can use good charts to create and tell stories. So, most of the material is coming from this book. Of course, I recommend you to read the whole book, and it's about $20, so it's definitely worth your money to get that and read it. Now, before we start talking about good charts, let's talk about something as well. So let's talk about kind of a little bit of stories. So in your assignment so far, so let me expand this. So what you did was basically in the last assignment 2, right? So you created this. So this is where you left off. In this assignment, I want you to create this Gapminder style. And this Gapminder style is basically a certain way of creating kind of two-dimensional charts, and they are dynamic. So I'm going to actually show you how this works first. All right, so this basically shows you neonatal deaths and then GDP per capita, and shows over the years, as the years change, how it moves. So if you notice, actually, if you click on any country here, so each of these bubbles are country. Here is India. You can see actually how it traveled in those 1992, 2014, those 15 years. Okay, so how it changed. Here is in Pakistan. All right, so it actually went up and then came down. Okay, so you can actually look at many countries. So what I want you to do in this assignment is use whatever charts you have and create a story. Right, so create a story from these charts. So first thing I did was I created the Gapminder dashboard. So I actually use my legend for regions. I can look at each of those regions, and then I create the story. Now in your assignment description, there is a story, and this is my story, and I want you to create your own stories. Okay, so if you look at my story, I actually looked at my own home country, Turkey, and if you look at Turkey, it actually ranked in 1990 in its region. It ranked highest, so it was the highest in the neonatal deaths in Europe and Central Asia. Okay, so it's right there. So if you look at over time, so how Turkey changed, actually it moved from the first spot, and until 2014 it moved to the third spot. Okay, again, these are absolute values. They are not per capita values, so keep that in mind. But nonetheless, it's important, so I want to look at this absolute value. So there are 10,000 kids who died prenatally, neonatally in Turkey. Okay, so if you look at this, and then the story is basically, if you look at this, and so if you go page by page, so I basically say, okay, in 2014 it ranked number 3, and then how did Turkey fare since 1990? I can actually show you the trajectory. So this is how it moved. One thing you notice in this story is that there is this stall between 1998 all the way till 2000, I think 3. There is this stall. So it means neonatal deaths are dropping. Okay, so we have already seen this; they are dropping, but income is not growing. Okay, so there is this stall for about 4 years, 5 years. Okay, so what is the story behind this? The story behind this is basically in 2002 a new government took power, and it was basically due to changes in the country. So if you look at neonatal deaths were steadily going down. However, there was a stop, and up until like 2002 the income stayed around $9,000, okay, per capita. Okay, so what happened in 1999? So here's the story. The story in 1999, there was a huge earthquake. Okay, and the earthquake actually killed 25,000 people, and due to the earthquake, the power also changed hands. So between 1999 and 2002, when the election actually took place, so there was this kind of recession in the entire country. And since then, you notice in 2002 onwards, the income is actually started growing again. So okay, so if you look at this, this is actually in the exponential scale, so the income actually goes up to almost $20,000 per capita. Now, of course, this is the story until 2014. A lot of things have changed since then. Of course, these numbers have changed quite a bit, so I don't want to get into the politics of it so much, but this is basically how you tell a story. Okay, you basically look at your data, and then you look at how the data changes over time, right? And then you'll notice that there is this area that you need to focus. And the next thing is you use what is called the Snyderman's mantra, and then you say, okay, what is going on in this range? And then you look at that specific range, okay? So first of all, you say, okay, everything is good, growing. How about on the income level? You actually tell the story, okay? So we're going to talk about how to tell these stories and with good charts. Now, all of this is relatively easy to do in Tableau. So all you need to do is actually click here, and you basically say add a blank story point. On the left side, you can add a blank story point. Now you can drag any of your sheets from here, like line chart, and drop it right here. As soon as you have the line chart, you can actually highlight any country. You can actually choose a region, and then you look at only that region. Right? So, but what happens is as soon as you do this and select that region, and perhaps you may want to add, so here, China, so I can right click on this and just say annotate. Let me annotate the mark, and then I can just keep the default annotation. So mark it right there, okay? And then let me move it out of the way. I'm going to move it up, okay? So now this becomes your story point. Okay, now you can write what your story point says, okay? So it's relatively easy. There's really nothing to do. So just click on these buttons in the story and then add new pages, okay? And then you can actually go play, and you can add ways to play this manually, or you can even add automation as far as I remember. Right? So let's not spend too much time on this. It's so straightforward, and I have directions in your assignment how to get this done. All right, so let me go back and remove what I just did. All right. Now, the next thing is I want to show you, I don't want to save this, how to add reference lines. Okay, we're going to talk about them a little bit, but let me show you in Tableau how to add them. They're relatively easy to add. So I'm going to add few. Here, I'm going to add it on our histogram. So all I need to do is to add these. You go to the Analytics tab on the left side, Data Analytics. And from this, you can actually pick a reference line. Just click on this. Double click. There we go. So it's going to come up with the reference line. And by default, it's going to be black, but you can change it. So I've already created one here, so it comes up with that format. So but you can change it. You can have a line, you can have a band. So the band will be max min. You can have the distribution, 60%, 80%. You can change this, of course. And then you can actually have the line. Line is more common. So you can change the color. Let me make it purple. All right, so let's make it purple. And then I can actually change the value, right, from any of these, okay? I can have a constant value of my own choosing, so let's make it like 15, right? So that's also possible as well, right? So it's very flexible, it's very easy to do. Right? You can do it also in like bars like this, so let me get out of this. So if you need to tell your story and if you need reference points, you can add them here as well. So I'm going to go ahead and add one here too. I think I had already added. Let me add constant line. Okay, right there. Okay, and you can change the value and then format this. So let's leave it like that. And I'm going to go ahead and right click on this. Say if I can click on this. I'm going to say edit. Okay, so tricky. I'm just clicking on this and I go ahead and change the color. So that's another thing that you can add, and then you can add annotations to this as well, okay? So these reference lines and bands are relatively easy to add. Okay. To tie these two loose ends, and reference points and telling stories. Now, let's get to it. So most of this chapter, I'm going to talk about good charts with examples. And all of these examples are mostly coming from, almost all are coming from Scott Beranito's book. So the good charts, what is a good chart? So the good chart actually has this consistent structure and hierarchy, and it is clear. And what is clarity means, and it's also simple. What does simplicity mean? We're going to talk about these with examples. Right. And these two terms, clarity and simplicity, are kind of adding up to the Edward Tufte's principles of good chart. And here basically we're talking about these chart integrity and then the excellence of the chart. Okay, so those two things we're going to kind of talk about in relation to Edward Tufte. Now, what is a good chart? So first of all, a good chart leaves a good feeling behind your eyes. So that's the key. Okay, what does that mean? So let's take a look at it. So I'm going to look at the left chart on the left. Now, if you look at this chart, first of all, it has all these grid marks. There's this area chart, but it's very hard to tell what's going on. So you have to read the title to see what the chart is telling you. It says difference in labor productivity levels from their 2000 values for frontier firms and everyone else. Now, we assume the frontier firms are blue and then everyone else is orange, okay? But it's hard to tell. So this is not a good chart. This doesn't really leave good feeling behind our eyes. It's heavy. There's so much going on there. How can we fix this chart? So we can fix this chart by actually turning this chart to a line chart. And then clearly marking what we have on the chart. So as soon as we turn it on the line chart, it makes it easy to see. Plus, we also add these clear texting. Remember, this was a rule also Edward Tufte talked about. Just clearly mark what you have in the chart. And then you mark it as where the chart is. You don't mark it on the side. You mark it as close to where the user is looking. User is looking at these two lines. And you want to mark it close to those two lines. Okay. And then you have the story at the top. You notice it says percentage difference. Basically talks about what the formula is. But you don't, without even reading that formula, you immediately say that frontier firms are doing much better than everyone else. Okay, so that's the idea. Get the story across with the least amount of eye travel. If they want to learn more, they want to see, okay, what is this proxy? What does this number mean? And they can read at the top. Okay. So there is this hierarchy and structure of good charts, and Beranito actually shows us that their title is about 12%, subtitle is about 8%, and the field should be around 75%, and then the source line at the bottom should be about 5%. Okay, so this is again a rough measure, and it doesn't work in every single chart. Sometimes you may not have a title, especially if you have a workbook of bunch of charts. If you have a story of bunch of charts, the idea is be consistent. Okay. So whatever percentages you use, be consistent with that. And the weights and proportions of colors, be consistent with that. That's more important than making the chart perfect in terms of internally. Okay. Even a simple line chart, bar chart, as we talked about, and then scatter charts are just enough for most business purposes. All right. So let's look at two charts again. So the one chart here on the left side, it doesn't keep anything aligned. So let's look at this chart. So there are problems with this chart, and we're going to talk about this. The main problem is the alignment. Okay, so this chart fails to align things. So if you look at these labels, okay, or legends, one is over here, other one is over there, okay, which is okay if you don't have a choice. But here you have a choice. You could actually make everything line up, right? So and then you have this alignment issue. Okay, so there's multiple alignments here. Even though the chart itself is good, this labeling is not good. Okay. A better labeling for this chart will be, since you have this space, you can actually line up these legends, right? Very nicely. Immediately you can actually see it makes it much better. You just one simple step makes this chart much better. Again, we have the space. If we didn't have the space right here, if it was hard, this choice would have been fine. But we do have the space, so let's use it. So keep things aligned. Now, the next thing I kind of alluded to this is called keeping eye travel minimum. And this is one of the big errors you'll see day in and day out. Okay, so if you look at the chart on the left side, right? So you have these 4 lines going, okay? So if you look at those 4 lines, it's hard to tell which line is which. So, and you put the legend at the top, and sometimes people put it on the side, okay? It doesn't matter. You basically have to travel back and forth. So you have to do these travels back and forth to figure out which line is which, okay? There's an easy way to do this. You can actually mark it next to them, okay? Each one, you can just put, hey, this is the top 1%, right? And then 81st%, lowest 20, and then 21st to 20, the bottom percentile, okay? Right. So you can clearly see that over the years, the income, household average income actually went up quite a bit in 1%ers, okay? So you can immediately see that. Okay. So this was in 2011. So there was this dip actually. Now actually, again, I think it went up a little bit more, okay? So top 1%ers are doing very well. Well, at the cost of everyone else, of course. All right. So the good charts will need clarity and simplicity. So the clarity means there is nothing extra. So there is nothing on the chart that really doesn't add value to the chart. So anything that is non-essential, remove it. We talked about chart junk with Edward Tuff. It's exactly the same idea. Okay. And each element is unique in the chart and supports the visual. Okay. So you don't add elements that do not really add value. And of course, there are no vibrations. We talked about this before. There are no, Moir effects on the chart, so we don't need those vibrations. And finally, simplicity says remove the stuff. And the word Bernardino is using is called, the phrase he's using is kill your babies. Okay, so you create your chart, and it's kind of hard to do. So, but then at the end, you have to look at your chart and say, okay, I have this workbook. I have 5 different charts. Which one of these I want to keep? You keep the chart that has basically the clarity and remove everything else, okay, around it. Okay. So let's look at what clarity means. Okay. So here is an example of a chart that was in the actual paper, scientific paper that was written. Okay. So this basically shows you, it's hard to tell, but the story of polio vaccine. Okay. Polio vaccine was introduced around 1954. I think this is the reference point right here. So this is 1954. Okay. So this is when the vaccine is introduced, and then it shows you the incidence rate and in different regions. Okay. So in 10 regions across, it basically see the incidence rate. So that means the red means incidence is very heavy. Of course, the blue, darker the blue means there are no incidences, okay? It's very hard to tell, right? So if you look at this, it's not very clear. I mean, of course, if you know what you're looking at, if you know the story, then you can tell. But if you don't know the story, it's very hard to tell from this chart what is going on. So there's this remake of this chart using heat maps, right? And let's look at what happened. So the same chart with different regions. Now regions are clearly marked. So states are clearly marked. And you immediately see what the impact is. So in 1955, I was wrong actually, it wasn't 54, it was 1955. So the chart, the vaccine was introduced, okay? So right here is clearly marked when it's introduced and what that, in the previous chart, there was this pink line, but it wasn't clear what it was. So you had to know the text, you have to read the text inside the paper to understand what that line meant. But here immediately you say, okay, this is the vaccine introduced. You see, look at the cases, okay? The color scale is a bit different, but red means heavy, and then other colors actually mean it's actually gray means it's non-existent. Okay, so clearly, as we are waiting for a vaccine for coronavirus, you see that the polio vaccine, which was introduced in 1955, actually works very effectively. Right? So it's very nice and it's very clear chart. It's not simple; it's a lot of information in it, but it is very clear. But on the other hand, you may have a chart that's simple, okay, right? That may not be clear. So we're going to have an example of that as well, okay? So the clarity doesn't mean simplicity. Sometimes a very complex chart may be very clear, just like the one I just showed you, okay? And sometimes too much simplification also may lose clarity, okay? A complex chart may be more crystal clear than a simpler chart. Here is one example of a simple chart, relatively simple chart, but let's see how clear this chart is. I want you to take a few moments and look at this. It says relative likelihood of leaving a job after 1 year. Okay, perfect. So the reference point, this is the reference point. Okay, so the reference point says neither pay nor company reputation is more important to me. Okay, so these are people who are saying that they don't care for reputation or they don't care for the pay, and this is their likelihood of leaving. Okay, and then you pay people who say pay is more important to me. They are 17% more likely than the reference point, and the people who say reputation is more likely, they're 42% more likely to quit. But however, this chart is not very clear. I mean, you have to actually understand this. Someone has to explain it just like I did to understand. But if you look at the chart itself, it's hard to tell. I mean, you have to travel, you have to read each of these points to figure out what's going on, and you see, then you say, okay, this is the comparison. That's 17% difference, and this difference right there is 42%. Okay, right? But chart itself is not clear. You could have easily done this with just a simple, line chart. A simpler chart than this. A clearer chart than this, not simpler. This is as simple as you can get. Now, alternatively, a complex chart which has a lot of data in it could be very simple or very, very clear. Here's an example. So basically, it shows you the snow depth on Mount Mansfield. I don't know where Mount Mansfield is. Since 1954, right? So if you look at each month, and you can see each year here, all the gray areas are alternative years, and you actually look at 2015 and see it was just an average year. Okay, 2015 in no way was different than any extreme points. So here are the extreme points. So here are some extreme years, right? And here is another extreme year so one is at the top is high, another one at the bottom is low in terms of snow depth. Okay, but immediately it's a very complex chart. A lot of data is here, but it's very clear. Okay. So one more example. So one chart on the left is a terrible chart. Okay. So let's look at this chart. So it says sales reps. When you look at the sales rep, their past performance doesn't affect their future profits. Right. So what is going on in this chart? First of all, you have these deciles of sales force. Top 10% and bottom 10% and everything in between. Okay. So, and then you have to read through this and figure out what is going on. It says sales person future value. So that means this is the future value. Okay. And then the greens are their present value. All right. So if you look carefully, you'll see that, okay, so the present value of top performers are low, but their future values are higher, and vice versa in the bottom 10%. Okay, so these are revenue undervalued reps, then these are overvalues. Okay, so these reps are not doing well compared to their current, and these will do much better in their future. But this is not a good chart. It's very heavy, it's very busy, and it's very hard to understand. You have to travel to understand what these legends mean, colors mean. Okay, and then of course there's this heavy labeling on the y-axis, all those numbers. That just makes it, and then you have these grid lines that serve no purpose basically. Right. So you can clear out this chart by actually creating a nice story. First of all, you clearly marked who are valuable reps, who are cost reps. Don't allow your user to search for them. Okay. So the valuable reps, and immediately you put their future potential and their current potential as just a faded value. So what you want is the future. You want to focus on future. What you're trying to tell is basically, okay, these reps who are in the top percentile, top 2 deciles, okay, top 20%, their current sales are good, but they will do much better in the future. And these at the bottom, 20%, their current value, they may be very good, but their future value will be low. So that means you actually focus more on your top reps and then forget about everything else. Even though they may be doing currently very well, their future will not be representative. Okay, so you're going to have to focus on these valuable reps. Clearly, you mark these using a reference line, very clear reference line, and mark it. You say, okay, what does it mean? Don't make user go search for it. Okay, revenue undervalues reps future probability. No, just tell it exactly what it is. Okay, so this is what you mean, and this is what it means. Okay, and then of course clear out this axis. Don't put all those zeros there. Don't put all those values. Make it as clear as possible. Okay, let's just simplify, clarify, so that you can communicate. This is an excellent example of how you go from a chart which doesn't tell a story and chart which tells a story immediately. Alright, so we talked about this term before as kill your babies. So you're gonna feel as you build your charts, you're gonna feel that these are charts that you put effort in and that it has to be in your story. But no, you have to really look each chart and each element carefully and remove it if it doesn't serve any purpose. Even though you spend a lot of time on it, you kind of put an effort into it, just kill it. So is the element necessary? If it's yes, is it unique? And the next question is, can it be made any simpler? If none of this is true, then consider eliminating or modifying this chart. Okay. Now the next thing in the charts, good charts, is persuasiveness. So you have to make sure that your chart persuades the person that you're trying to tell the story. So they have to believe your story. That's what the idea is. Okay. So there are 3 steps to this. Hone the main idea, focus on what the main idea is, and then the next thing is make it stand out. Just use markers, use highlight, use reference points just to make that idea come out. And finally, adjust what is around. So you may have another stories that are coming around and you want to hide them out, kind of fade them back so that the main story actually kind of comes out to the front. Okay. So let's look at another chart with an example. So how do we persuade? So here is the sales performance by region. So what is your story and how do you hone it and how do you hide everything else? Okay, so we're going to look at these 3 steps with this chart. Hone the main idea, make it stand out, and adjust what is around. So what is the story? What is the story here you're trying to tell? Okay. So the first, find the story. The story is, look at these red dots. And this is a region that performs much better than everyone else. So this is basically average size of the sale and number of sales. So that region, Midwest region, is doing in both parameters, both KPIs. So their sales size is large and they sell a lot. Okay, so that means total sales is large. So if you look at everyone else, you can immediately see that that region is doing well and everyone else is not doing very well. Okay, so you see each region has some representatives here. Okay, so take your story and then hone it. Okay, what is not the same story? What the fuck is going on here? But is this really your story? Is this what you want to focus on? Focus that Midwest is doing very well. Okay. Now that may not be your story. So your story may be totally different. You may be trying to highlight the fact that some regions are actually doing very bad. So if you look at the West region, I know it's hard to tell from these colors, so let me make this larger. I'm going to actually go ahead and mark, I'm going to use red this time. So you can focus on Midwest and say that Midwest is doing very well, but that's not maybe that the idea. Your story is maybe you want to look at the West and look at the values of West and see these are the West values. I know hard to tell, but I'm going to make my best effort, okay, to mark them. Okay, so you notice if you again draw a line, you see that most of the West sales are on the left side. Most of the reps in the West region are on the left side of this line, okay, and below and left, right? So maybe that's the story you want to focus. You want to focus not so much as to the Midwest as the best performing, but that's not the criteria. You want to show that there is a region actually which is not doing very well. There are a lot of sales reps in that region, they're not doing very well. If that is your story, you have to tell it. So there are 2 stories here. Which one are you trying to tell? Don't let users decide. You just have to tell it. What you can do is you can actually go ahead and tell the West Coast story by honing your story, creating a reference line, and then making everyone else, every other story behind, just hide everything else. So by combining this other and then using a reference color for them, which is a kind of a gray color, you immediately tell the story. Here is the story of West. West Coast sales reps underperform, and you just immediately make that your title. So it becomes much clearer. Here there are 2 stories, as I told you, and which one is it you're telling? You're not telling. So you're saying, okay, here's the sales performance by region. You, as the reader, go ahead and decide which story you want to focus on. Here I'm telling the story. I'm just saying, okay, I care about West Coast underperforming, and this is what my story is. All right. So final thing I want to talk about here is this is not going to be in one step. What you need to do is you need to refine to persuade. Okay. So if you look at this chart, here it basically shows you number of people living in cities and suburbs. So this is the original chart. We start from this chart. Okay. And it's hard to tell what is going on, which one is suburbs. You have to travel. There's an eye travel back and forth. Okay. Right. That's not even true. Okay. So let me change my color also. Right, so this is blue and this is suburb. It's even hard to tell. So what you do is step by step, you go and you step by step, you go to this final chart. I'm going to go to this chart, and immediately you can tell, which cities are, which ones are doing well, which ones are not. Okay. Now, of course, you need to add here. This is cities. Okay, right. And then, this is, sorry, that's not even that. It's suburbs and cities, okay? By clearly marking this, you can immediately tell the story, okay? Highlight, so use what you want to highlight, okay? So it's the millions of people in suburbs. Immediately show, by highlighting that color, immediately show which one you're trying to focus. Again, this is still missing. It's not even 100%. You need to have those markers. So what next I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few examples. Okay, these are examples I collected over the years of good charts and bad charts. All right, I'm going to start them right now. So this is the first chart I'm going to focus on. I want you to look at this chart and tell me, or find what is wrong with this chart. Says average height of men by year of birth. Okay, so in all regions, all these countries, whatever they may be, you notice that the average height is growing. So people have access to better nutrition, so they're growing in size. But it's hard to tell which country is which. So you have to go do an eye travel back and forth to find out which line refers to which country. Okay, so the best will be to put those names right next to these charts. Okay, and actually, I have one example from the same R word in data, and you get this version. Here's an example. It says share of deaths from outdoor air pollution, and you notice immediately you can actually see here's China, here's India, and Turkey is here, there, Egypt. Okay, that's right. So you immediately see where they stand. Okay, so reduce eye travel. That's really important. Okay, now here's another example chart. This basically shows you very easily shows you what is the cost to state per each student versus per inmate. So you notice that there are, first of all, you immediately notice that students actually cost less. It's better to keep students in schools than in jail. Okay, so and then you can see the difference. So here's the very easy point. You can actually see here are some states. You see here is New York State. Here is New Jersey. Here is Connecticut, here is California. They spend a lot of time, a lot of money and effort on keeping inmates in jails. This is annual cost versus keeping them in, not the same people, but keeping people in schools. Okay? So clearly you tell the story, say, okay, spend more on schools, don't spend more on jails. And you can also make people go less to the jails if you spend on education more. Okay? Very persuasive. The next chart I'm going to show you is a beautiful chart that shows you the global population and how it's distributed across the globe. Okay, so the current population is over 7 million. It's even more than now. It's 2015. You can see that how not only you see each country how they grew, and you can also see the entire world how it grew. Okay, so 1920 versus 2015, 7 billion versus almost 2 billion, okay, less than 2 billion, right? So beautiful chart. The next chart I want to show you is this chart. Shows you, and this was from BBC, basically shows you whether this was about the fires when the Australian fires and California fires were happening. So it basically shows you how fast the grass fire moves and how fast the forest fire moves and how fast the average person moves. 6.5, almost 6 miles per hour. That's quite fast. Okay, you notice the grass fire is much faster, almost like more than twice as fast as an average person. Okay, that's why it's a important issue, and it actually kills a lot of people and destroys a lot of property. And the final thing I want to talk about is, I have two more charts actually. So I'm going to actually show you this chart. So this shows you, it's again another beautiful chart, shows you the age of the oldest living person at any point in time. Okay, so the pink means that oldest living person at that point in time is a lady, and blue means is actually a man. Okay, so here's the female, and as you can notice that females are living much longer on average, and also at the extreme. Okay, so here is that one person from 1990 all the way till 2000. She was the longest living person. She lived up to 122 years, and I think she was a French lady. Okay, and then when she died, it went down to 117, 5 years younger, and she actually died, and this is how it goes. Right? So here are short stretches of where men lived the longest. Okay, again another beautiful and very clear chart. Now, final thing I want to show you in terms of errors. This is one of the examples. And look at this chart. It says which one of these was the most important to you in deciding how to vote today, all voters. So here it says housing and homelessness, health. So which one was the highest? It's hard to tell, right? It's actually health was the highest. But if you look at the bar here, where the label is, it's the shortest blue bar. But actually, the bars were the red bars. So the actual percentages were the red bars, but somehow they had these blue bars and put these labels here, so it totally confuses you. Actually, health was 32%, 26% was housing and homelessness. Okay. Again, another bad labeling, totally changing how the chart should convey its information. All right. Two more charts actually. Let me show you this chart as well. This is a recent chart. This basically shows you the COVID-19 deaths and across regions. So you can actually see the countries, US unfortunately, and this is a recent chart. This was April 9th, I think it was published in April 9th. Okay, so the rest of the Europe is taking a large share. Okay, right. And you can also see Asia, Middle East, Europe, and North America and how it's growing. So it's actually North America is taking the lead, unfortunately, getting to take the lead in terms of deaths in coronavirus. Again, one simple chart. You notice in this case, the regions, the titles are not all lined up, but nonetheless, this is how they should be because the chart allows you to area where you can place these, and it makes the life still easy. You have a little bit of eye travel, but that's what you have to live with. Otherwise, it will be totally confusing to put those 5 labels right here. You could not tell which one belonged to which. Okay, but this makes it, even though there's a little bit of eye travel, this still makes it much clearer. Right? So complex chart, nonetheless, it's very clear what the story is. Of course, these days we are spending a lot of time looking at these exponential charts, and it says time spent looking at exponential chart actually is growing exponentially. All right, so this wraps up my lecture on good charts, and next time I'm going to actually switch gears and I think jump into Python and do some charts in Python as well. All right, bye now.